여러분, 오늘은 New Digital SAT에 대해서 말씀드릴 건데요. 제가 지난 영상들 중 한두 번 정도는 New Digital SAT에 대해서 어떤 부분에 체인지가 되는지 간단하게 말씀드리긴 했는데요. 오늘은 이렇게 멋진 저희 에픽 튜터 두 분과 함께 조금 더 심도 있게 선생님들 입장에서 학생들과 부모님들께 어떻게 디지털 SAT가 바뀌고 준비하는 게 좋을지 알려드리는 거예요. 이제는 벌써 인터내셔널 학생들은 2023년 올해 3월에 처음으로 뉴 디지털 SAT가 오피셜하게 시작이 됐고요. 한국은 벌써 많은 SAT 학원들이 작년부터 실전 시험과 똑같이 연습 시험 문제들을 미리 미국보다 1년 일찍 앞서서 준비를 해야 해서요. 어쩔 수 없이 많은 문제들을 예측해서 만들어 놓아야 했어요. SAT 출판사들도 거의 이번 여름부터는 책 판매가 가능해져서요. 점점 테스트 매출들이 많이 확보되면서 모두들 분주하게 새롭게 변한 디지털 SAT에 대해서 완전 준비 태세에 들어가고 있어요. SAT 시험이 바뀔 때마다 느끼는 거지만요. 원래 영어 실력과 매스 실력이 기본이 탄탄하게만 일단 만들어 놓는다면요. 그 시험 유형이 바뀌어도 금방 점수를 올리는 거는 문제없이 다들 올라가더라고요. 금방 새로운 시험에 적응을 하고 좋은 성적으로 대학에 입학하게 되기 때문에 기본을 튼튼히 하고 문제 유형에 익숙해지고 연습을 많이 하면 걱정하실 필요가 전혀 없어요. 이번 여름 미국 학생들은요, 특히 현재 10학년, 11학년들 중에 현재 SAT 점수가 본인이 목표한 점수에 가깝다면요, 차라리 3월에 시행되는 첫 디지털 SAT를 플랜하지 않고 커런트 페이퍼 SAT의 마지막 시험인 12월 첫째 주 SAT 시험으로 마무리하려고 하는 학생들이 많아요. 지금 아직 목표 점수에 가깝지 않거나 9학년인 학생들은 내년 3월에 있을 디지털 SAT를 준비하는 학생들로 이렇게 나눠져서 공부를 진행하게 돼요. 또 한 가지 알고 계시면 좋은 거는요, 현재 SAT에서 고득점을 받은 학생들은요, 올 10월에 있을 PSAT, NNSQT 테스트를 보면서 내셔널 메리트 스칼러십을 타겟을 하게 되는데요. 이 시험에서 99% 점수를 받은 학생들만 해당하는 거라서요. 고득점 학생들은 당연히 심도를 기울여 이 테스트를 보고 있어요. 그런데 이번 10월 PSAT부터 디지털 PSAT로 먼저 바뀌면서요. 디지털 SAT를 안 봐도 되는 미국 학생들은 이번 여름에 PSAT 디지털 테스트를 위해서 프랩을 하게 되는 학생들이 생기게 되는 거죠. 내년 봄 3월부터는 SAT가 디지털로 첫 시험이 시작되면서요. 본격적으로 디지털 테스트 프랩으로 모든 게 전환하게 돼요. 그래서 이번 여름에 내가 언제까지 무슨 테스트를 준비해야 하는지 방향을 잡고 잘 준비해야 해요. 자, 그럼 오늘 우리 두 선생님들 모셔놓고 디지털 SAT에 대해서 일단 무엇이 바뀌고 어떻게 준비하면 좋을지 오늘 저희 선생님들과 다시 한번 알아보고요. 준비하는 시간을 가져봐요.
I'm Daniel. I'm an SAT tutor for all subjects, math, reading, writing, and the ACT, including science. I have a bachelor's in economics and bioanthropology and a master's in international development.
Hi, my name is Chris, and I am an SAT, ACT tutor, and I specialize in the reading and writing sections. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and actually just this week I completed my master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages.
So Daniel, why don't you explain about what changes there with the new digital SAT, maybe the structures, anything, any like big tips, first before we start with the more details about each subject? Yeah.
So overall, the SAT is going to be a lot shorter when it's digital. It's going to be down to 2 hours and 14 minutes from 3 hours, and it is a digital test, so it will be taken on a laptop or a tablet, and the reading and writing section are no longer separate. They are now combined into one section. And then the last major change I would like to talk about is that the test is going to be adaptive. So for reading and writing, there'll be 2 modules, and the second one's going to be either easier or harder based on how the student does on the first module. And math will be the same. 2 modules, and the second one will be based off of how the student does on the first module.
Okay.
And that's the overall changes.
That's overall changes as a structure, right? We're going to talk more detail about it, of course. So, the digital SAT, that's the big changes, right? Because from the paper. And then with the module 1 and module 2, the difficulty level affects the module 2. That's the big things too. So Why don't we begin with the reading and writing? And Chris, will you explain more about, I know you actually gather some questions, so we'll probably go from there, each questions. So first question that you got it from students, actually, how does the timing compare to the old test?
Okay, so like Daniel said, the test as a whole is going to be a lot shorter, which is going to be helpful for students so they don't get so tired when they're taking it. But another good part of it is that each question is going to have more time. So per question, you have more time to think about your questions.
What's the time per question?
So for the reading and writing section, which is together, each question will have about 71 seconds to answer. And on the math section, 95 seconds per question.
Okay.
The question types overall are going to be the same. They're still testing the same skills in reading and writing, such as craft and structure, information and ideas, standard English conventions, and expression of ideas. But due to the changes in how the test is formatted, with each passage being just one short paragraph and then one question, there are some question types that they just can't do anymore. For example, there are going to be no more line reference questions where you have to look through the whole passage and check these lines, these lines, these lines, and interpret them, which I think is very fortunate for test takers. Another thing is that the vocabulary questions are going to make up a larger percentage of the total questions on the test. So that means that students going forward preparing for this test are going to want to practice vocabulary with a special focus. So often it's going to be words that are very similar in meaning, but with subtle differences that differentiate them.
Do you think the students have to study more than vocabulary than before? Or as far as I know, the number of vocab that covers in current SAT is about 4,000 vocabulary. But now I see that the data shows that it's about 2,500. So do you think that, less number, because as the passages got shorter, but then the vocab, seems need to be more worked on because more multiple meanings?
Yeah, so the idea is fewer words, but knowing these words with greater depth.
Right.
It's not about just knowing one word and one definition. It's about knowing all the definitions of this one word, even the ones we don't use very often. Is it a positive word? Is it a negative word? What other emotions are associated with it? That kind of thing.
Passages on the current test is really long, and then the new one is actually very short. So can you explain a little more about the changes there?
Yeah, so because these passages are so short, it's going to change the way that you approach them. So on the test that we currently have, the paper tests, a lot of the difficulty that students have comes from just staying focused throughout that whole long passage and synthesizing information from the top all the way to the bottom. Now each question and each passage, they're so condensed that it's easier to, I think, maintain your focus on it, and you don't have to do as much synthesis of information as before.
How are the reading and writing questions organized? Mix of reading than writing?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest difficulties that students have with the current SAT, on both the reading and the writing section, is determining what kind of question they're looking at, and then that will inform what kind of strategy they should use. Fortunately, on the new digital SAT, all the content domains are going to be organized in sequence. So you're going to have like 8 vocabulary questions, and then 8 main idea questions, and then 8 punctuation questions, and it's going to be very clear what you're supposed to do when you have to do it.
That's really nice. What topics will the reading passages be about?
So, as you may know, currently the SAT reading section has passages about historical documents, literature, science, social science. We're going to still have those on the new digital SAT, but there's also going to be a wider range of topics because there's going to be so many different readings. As opposed to just 5 readings or 4 on the writing, there's going to be dozens, So that means things that maybe you didn't have to prepare for before, you should take a look at now. Like on the practice test that we showed earlier, there's actually a few passages that are poetry, which students have never had to worry about before in the SAT.
Is it going to be harder or easier?
So I think overall the test is going to be easier in a lot of ways. Easier for time management, easier for organization, and knowing when to apply skills and that kind of thing. But I do think there are some changes that students need to be aware of if they want to do well. So don't think you can just sit back. You still have to get ready for this transition that's going to be taking place.
Right. All right. Now we're going to talk about math, Daniel. So can you talk about just overall what the changes in SAT maths?
Sure. So for the math section, there aren't going to be that many overall changes. It's more the structure with the two modules. So there's no longer a no calc and a calc section. You can use your calculator on the entire test, and it's just those two modules. But all of the content is going to be the same. It's going to be mostly algebra and algebra 2, and with a little bit of geometry and trig and data analysis questions.
Okay. How the difficulty level questions look like compared to the current one?
So the difficulty of the math questions is going to be about the same, except for the word problems are going to be a little bit shorter, and they've taken out a few algebra 2 concepts, such as imaginary numbers. But other than that, there's not too many changes.
Okay. So also for that, I think you prepare for the questions.
So yeah, here we can see a word problem, and this is about as long as they're going to be on the digital SAT, which makes them a lot more easier for people that speak English as a second language.
Okay, that's good news. Any other example that you have with SAT math?
Yeah, here we can see the calculator, which is provided by Desmos, which a lot of students are already familiar with. And that will be built into the application that College Board is using to administer the test.
That's awesome. As an ending mark, what would you say to students, before they prepare for the new digital SAT? What are things, they need to focus on to do that?
So you are going to want to focus on vocabulary, usage, and also getting a wider variety of reading practice. I think everyone should know that although there are some changes coming and the format might be a little different than what you're used to, it is definitely still possible to be successful on the new digital SAT, and some aspects of it will certainly be a smoother experience for students, such as the shorter length and the cleaner organization of it.
With the new changes to prepare for the math portion of the SAT, it's still going to be almost all the same content. So students just need to get their algebra down, their geometry, and focus on those data analysis questions. But other than that, the questions should be a little bit easier to read.
Okay. 오늘 이렇게 선생님들 얘기도 들어보고 체인지되는 뉴 SAT 테스트에 대해서 조금 더 자세하게 알게 됐는데요. 학생들의 질문도 직접 모아서 학생들이 알고 싶어하는 부분을 직접 잘 설명이 되었을 거라고 믿고요. 제가 간단하게 마무리로 정리해서 말씀드린다면요. 가장 크게 바뀐 부분은 첫째로 SAT가 디지털로 컴퓨터로만 시험을 본다는 거고요. 두 번째로는 시간이 완전 줄어서 현재 SAT는 3시간이라는 시험 시간이라면 디지털 SAT는 2시간 14분, 거의 1시간이 줄었고요. 세 번째로는 테스트가 어댑티브 테스트라는 거죠. 테스트가 마줄 1과 마줄 2로 이렇게 시험이 두 세트로 나오는데요. 마줄 1의 퍼포먼스가 마줄 2의 문제 난이도를 결정한다는 거고요. 마줄 1을 잘했으면 마줄 2는 조금 더 어려워지고요. 마줄 1을 좀 못 봤다면 마줄 2가 좀 쉬워지는 거고요. 이게 가장 모든 학생들에게 고민되는 부분일 것 같아요. 네 번째로는요. 시험 시간이 짧아진 이유는 리딩이 패세지가 무지 길게 5문단씩 나오는 게 아니고 한 문단의 문제가 1개라는 거죠. 리딩 컴프리션을 제대로 테스트하는 거고요. 그걸로 인해서 보캡이 조금 좀 난이도가 있어질 수 있겠다는 예상이에요. 다섯 번째로는 매스에서 노 캘큘레이터 섹션이 없어지는 거고요. 다 계산기를 사용할 수 있는 테스트로 바뀌게 되는 거죠. 이게 가장 큰 메이저 체인지의 요점이고요. 오늘 들으셨듯이 SAT 테스트가 이렇게 바뀌면서 더 여러 가지 다른 부분들도 있지만요. 유형이 바뀌는 것에 대해 너무 걱정하기보단 어떻게 바뀌는지 알아보고 준비를 하면 더 잘 볼 수 있는 시험이고요. 바뀌는 게 없는 건 점수가 똑같이 1600점이 만점이라는 거고요. 그리고 우리 학생들 이렇게 공부할 때 결국은 Reading, Writing, Math 파운데이션만 잘 잡아놓는다면 어떤 시험 문제가 나와도 문제는 없을 것 같아요. 그럼 오늘 시간도 도움이 되셨길 바라고요. 저는 그럼 다음 시간에도 여러분들이 궁금해하시는 미국 교육에 관한 다른 토픽으로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 안녕히 계세요.